they're very specialized. They do this thing and they do it very, very, very well. It's kind of like the Navy SEALs for breaking into computers, sort of thing, right? They're very heavily trained. They've got the right tooling. They really know what the adversary looks like. They've done their homework. They have billions, literally, in data sitting in warehouses that they can process. Like they can get into anything they want.
All right, we've got Robert Hansen, the RSnake. He's an American computer hacker, executive, and entrepreneur, host of the RSnake show. You may or may not know this about Robert, but he's hacked over 2,100 banks, credit card processors, flight control systems, water and electrical systems, while under contract to do so, of course. But he's here in the house. He's going to tell us
Yeah,
how
of course.
the end is nigh and we are all doomed. Robert, what's up?
How you doing, sir? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Robert, glad to have you here. Look, the world is changing so rapidly. We are so connected to each other via tech. I sometimes think about this. What happens if I wake up and there's just no power? What do I do if there's no power for a few days? Yeah, I actually think about this too. Do I need to focus on other skills? I'm focused on AI and digital media production and marketing. I'm like, but if all the lights go out, what does that matter? Maybe I should start learning how to plant orange trees or something. I don't know. We'll see. But my question for you before I go too off the rail here.
I think you should do. I think you should do both. How about that?
And man, I like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all about I think. But
Mm-hmm.
listen, you've hacked over all these different you've hacked all these different systems. How vulnerable are our electrical systems?
Very. So they don't get the kind of same type of adversarial situation that you would see at like a retailer. Like retailers, they're seeing bad guys constantly hacking them all day long, trying to steal, a TV or a car stereo or whatever. And so for them, it's pretty easy to tell whether they're secure or not because they're you can see their losses immediately. But with power and water and electrical, sorry, and like airplanes and that kind of stuff, like the things that there's no direct money necessarily to be made in making an airplane move from side to side or whatever, or flickering the power on and off exactly. But but there definitely is a nation state utility, no pun intended, in having the ability to see what's going on there, but also eventually turn it off if they feel like it. And so in the future battle space, that is absolutely one of the very first things that would go. Water and power, any sort of transponder related anything. So your boats, they're all using the same kind of transponder stuff, which are by the way unencrypted. And your airplanes also, their transponders are unencrypted. Um, for legacy reasons.
How can they be unencrypted? Like it seems pretty important that a 757 Boeing doesn't fly into the middle of a tower or something.
Um,
How can these be unencrypted? This seems crazy to me.
well, so there's reasons for and against. The reason for doing it, as you said, is I know where these airplanes are and can lie to them, or I can lie to them about other airplanes in the airspace and get them to think things are happening that aren't happening. And there's a lot of little subtleties there. But ultimately, the airplane is controlled by a human, and that human can just look out the window and say, "I don't see an airplane out there. I'm sorry, you're wrong. I'm not going to take evasive maneuvers and fly into this tower." Let's say, like just they have other controls in place. And another version of that would be GPS. So I can spoof the GPS location and tell them they're in a place they're not, or slowly tell them that they're moving to the side, and so they kind of move over to the side. But they have onboard gyroscopes, so they can tell if they're going straying off course or whatever. So ultimately, it's up to the person in the cockpit to decide whether to do the terrible thing or not. Now, that all relies on that person actually paying attention. So in certain circumstances, you might be able to get them to think things that are not true, or to do things in situations where they start trusting instruments a little too much and not doing the double check, and that's where the real problems end up being. So yes, it is possible. I have broken into those systems before, specifically a system called weights and balances, or weights and measures, depending on who's telling you what the system's called, but which basically tells you what the weight of the airplane is in three-dimensional space. So like a lot of cargo up front or a lot of cargo in the back, you would want to change your flaps to do a certain thing as you're going off the runway. That's all programmable. You can tell the airplane, here's what your weight is. And so it's up to the person in the cockpit to go and visually inspect it and go, no, I don't have a lot of cargo back there, or I've done my own checking of that. If they start relying on the sensors, then that's a real big problem.
I mean, naturally, I'm thinking of loss of human life, but I guess to your point,
Well, so am I,
there's just
because
not as much.
if you run off the end of the runway because your flaps are set wrong, or you go up and you stall because your flaps are set wrong, that would be very catastrophic. So I guess to answer your question, yes, it makes a tons of sense to encrypt it, but also the other problem is if you encrypt it and any bit is missing, which unfortunately over staticky radios, oftentimes you have clipping just because, random RF interference from the ground, or solar flares or whatever, you still want to get some communication to go by. If it's just slightly out of range, or you're kind of getting a little bit of static, you'd still like to be able to hear what's going on. But with encryption, it's got to be perfect. You can't tamper with it. So you'd have to have very, very, very short encrypted packets going by to make that make sense. And that just ends up being both costly, not by today's standards, but at the time it was, and more importantly, dangerous because RF on the ground interferes with it.
Gotcha, gotcha. So there's a method to the madness, and I guess to your point, there's more money in hacking, say, casino giants like MGM than there are
Absolutely.
in airplane. So if my recollection serves me correctly, in 2023, back in October, there were two or three major Las Vegas casinos that got
Yeah.
hacked. And the hackers basically said, "Hey, we're holding all your information hostage unless you pay us." I think it was like $10 million or 100. I don't remember the exact amount. One of the casinos gave in; they paid it so that they could get their info back. The other one said, "We ain't paying. Hold it hostage." Who got that one right?
I don't think either of them got it right. It's just sort of the devil you know, which is we can get our data back right now and kind of recover, or do we want to feed the adversary? So there's this kind of there's this thing going around the internet that's I've seen a lot, and I actually hate it, which is there's a bear in the woods analogy. You just got to run faster than the guy next to you because the bear will eat them and you'll be safe. Well, there's a lot of problems with that analogy on the internet. Number one, there's not only one bear. Number two, the bear is not permanently satiated. Number three, you cannot leave the woods. You're not going to shut off your company. You're still in the woods, like, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of problems with that analogy. A better analogy is something like prairie dogs. Prairie dogs, like normally, they will not let other little critters into their hole. Like, no, you can't come in, right? But if there's ever like an eagle or a fox nearby, all comers, anybody who wants in the hole, everybody get in the hole. And there's a lot of evolutionary sense to that, because if you protect the surroundings, your enemies, the people who are trying to go after the same food sources you are, but you starve the thing that's actually killing you, it's actually better for everybody. And that's kind of what we're seeing when you feed the adversary, you actually give them the $10 million or whatever. It's not like it's suddenly gone. Just because they stop attacking you doesn't mean someone else isn't going to attack you. And now they know you're the kind of company that's going to pay out. But plus, that $10 million went to fund that organization, and now they're taking out everything around you and all this other stuff that you care about. So they may not care that they're back up in line, but what if their power system goes down, as you said, which did happen with Colonial Pipeline? So that's you. It's not like we're living in a bubble. We don't get to it's once you're on the internet, once everything's interconnected, you can't just pretend like these things aren't affecting you in other sort of tertiary or secondary situations. Like you go to your bank, you can't use your bank anymore. Well, that's not my fault. I didn't do it. No, but you did pay them $10 million to go do it, and so that's the risk.
Yeah, you're kind of essentially incentivizing the bad behavior,
Precisely.
But I guess their thought is, well, we'll pay them off, we'll get our information back, hopefully, right? Hopefully they don't just say, "Oh, you paid us 10, give us another 20." Um, but then you can go and shore up your weaknesses to try to avoid future
You
hacks,
can.
right? I guess
You
that's
can,
I guess that's
and
the
you're
that's the
you're
thought.
betting that they will. In my experience, it doesn't really matter. A guy like me will still get in if I want to get in. But For the average adversary who is just running some software that they downloaded somewhere, sure, you could probably stop that from happening.
I'm curious, is there a certain point where small business owners, companies should start to become very wary of hackers? Is there a certain price point? Like, is there a certain like revenue point? Like once you hit 1 million annual revenue, like you should really be paying attention to this. You should be paying attention to it when you're small potatoes. What's the point where the small business owner needs to be paying attention to these types of hacks?
It's actually a ratio. It's not a strict number. So it's the expected value of loss post compromise times likelihood on one axis, and the other axis is the cost of remediation pre compromise. If you have a whole bunch of stuff up here, up into the left, that is terrible. That means you're in a really really bad economic situation, and you should pay attention to it. If you got a bunch of stuff down here, well, maybe just get insurance policy and do the minimums, just compliance minimums, and call it a day.
And how do you measure something like what was it you said, the risk factor or
The
the
expected
the
value of
chance of being
loss,
hacked?
yeah, times likelihood. Well, likelihood is a measurement of, well, there's several different ways to measure it. The insurance companies know, because we have a lot of data now, exactly which vulnerabilities lead to compromise. But more importantly, not just the ones that lead to compromise, the ones that lead to loss, and not just the ones that lead to loss, the ones that lead to loss claims. So that's like narrowing down just a handful of vulnerabilities. We're talking about like 50, 60 vulnerabilities tops. So from that perspective, I only need to fix 50, 60 vulnerabilities. The rest truly do not matter from a breach loss perspective. Now, I'm not talking about governments here. I'm not talking about oil and gas where there might be a long term reason to have access. But for a mom and pop retailer, like you don't need to do anything more than those handful of vulnerabilities, except for whatever compliance mandates you to do. And that's sort of a separate bad actor, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, effectively, if you can figure out like, hey, we've got these vulnerabilities. The one kind of simple way to think about it is if it's in a tool called Metasploit. If you have a vulnerability in your system currently that's in Metasploit, you're probably already hacked if that thing has been around for a while. But if you aren't, you're going to be hacked very shortly. It's one of those things that people just, once it becomes super easy for any hacker on earth to run, and they don't have to know how it works, they just click a couple buttons, well, you're going to get hacked. And it's something crazy. Like if you put a brand new, fresh install of a computer online that has a known vulnerability on it, it's something like a handful of seconds before you're compromised. It really is almost no time whatsoever.
I'll tell
So
you what, there ain't no problems like tech problems either.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
I ran into a few cloud issues this year, and it completely brought my business to a standstill. Not fun,
I'm sorry to
not
hear
fun.
that.
I Yeah, I mean, it wasn't I wasn't hacked or anything. It was just, the cost of growth means you run into, more money, more problems type of deal. And I was able to resolve them, but I had to call up my IT friend. It took me basically I had to take a week off of my normally scheduled programming to try to figure out these tech issues. Um, but anyway, it led me. It's when you leave your day job and you go all in on your own business, you learn every day. Um, and so building out the tech stack the right way is obviously important. You did mention too, Robert, uh, the vulnerabilities and like I I I I turn my head to the government a little bit. There's so many government programs, so many employees, and quite frankly, I don't know how you'll feel about this, but a lot of these government officials don't seem like serious people. They just don't like just a few weeks ago there was a Senate staffer caught doing the deed in the middle of the Senate hearing room. It's like these are not serious people. They're stealing women's clothing from airport terminals. Men are stealing like these are not serious people. Like are we actually treating is the US government treating hacking and cybersecurity with enough respect, with the respect that it needs to have?
Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no, and it kind of depends on which groups you're talking about. Like the tailored access group, those guys are very serious. Those are real actors, and there's a couple other teams that I know inside the Pentagon that are extremely talented and know what they're doing. They're an outlier though. There's a they're very specialized. They do this thing and they do it very, very, very well. It's kind of like the Navy SEALs for breaking into computers, sort of thing, right? They're very heavily trained. They've got the right tooling. They really know what the adversary looks like. They've done their homework. They have billions, literally, in data sitting in warehouses that they can process. Like they can get into anything they want. Um, Now you extrapolate, you go one level out to, their bosses or their bosses' bosses, or the staffers who give them the money or tell them what sort of things to go after. The people who are telling them, hey, we want to go tackle this section of some government somewhere in some other country. Uh, yeah, it's pretty iffy. It's pretty iffy. And unfortunately, those people are the ones who have the purse strings, so they get to decide who gets to do what. They create the policies that we all rely on. So if they don't do their job, it almost doesn't matter how good those Taylor Access guys are. Like the Tau can have all the money in the world, but if they're not allowed to do the thing that they're supposed to do, then they're not very useful. Or vice versa, they can be tasked to do the right thing but don't have the right tooling, and so what are you going to do? They're not going to be very effective.
Well, no, but you're not winning an election saying we're going to enhance cybersecurity. That's not sexy. It doesn't sell. People aren't going to show up at rallies. Um, I mean, I think Trump probably did the closest thing by saying I'm going to build a wall, and that, I mean, you could say it worked out for him or it didn't work out for him, but um, cybersecurity just it just strikes me that we're not taking this stuff seriously enough, quite frankly. And all it takes is like one major hack. Look, I'm going to actually segue a little
Well,
bit to the future of warfare, if
well,
I could.
before you jump, and this is related, it depends on if you mean offensive or defensive. So offensive, I think we're doing an okay job, and the teams working on that are quite good. Like really, very the offensive side, very very good.
How do you
That
mean?
they know what they're doing. They're very technically capable. They've got the right tooling. They're
Well, I mean,
quite
what do
good.
you mean by offensive? Like we're hacking into
Hacking into other
Chinese.
countries. Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Or whether or not we are doing it, we have the capability of doing it, which is more important actually. Um, the defensive side, though, one of my very first customers in my previous company was the DoD, and um, they thought I'd find about 100,000 assets, web enabled some things, whatever it is, printers or, computers or whatever on the public internet. On my first try, I found 1.9 million, and now I'm much, much higher than that in the many, many millions of assets. And, these are not things that should be on the internet. These are things that they don't want on the internet, like outdated firewalls that aren't even made anymore, printers, and my outdated Minecraft servers sitting on the 10th fleet, and all kinds of crazy that are vulnerable. Like all these things are vulnerable. And so when I talk with those people, they understand the problem space conceptually, but they are wildly underfunded and really do not have enough actual like internal expertise to understand how to do this. There's a handful. They're like a very small handful of guys who are good in there, but you need an army, like a literal army, taking down hunting them down, figuring what they are, deciding whether you should have them or not, and turning them off or putting them behind firewalls or protecting them or whatever. That's going to take a literal army, not a figurative one. An actual army of people are going to have to walk around doing this. Um, and the amount of technical debt we've incurred because of this is enormous. And I'm not even talking one level past there, which is the government contractors, or one level past there, which is the government. I'm not talking about the military here, I'm talking about the government.gov. Like those guys, it's almost as bad as you could possibly imagine, because the government is not comprised of like a small tiger team of people who are tasked to do a thing. They're like Joe Bob's nephew who built our dog catching website for us. And, there's like some random traffic system that, lowest bidder in some little company is probably not even around anymore, who just happen to be on the government contractor list. Like I've met some of these government contractors and I wouldn't use them for anything. Like literally not anything. They're just not qualified to do this type of work, but they got in there at the right time. They schmoozed the right government employee, and now they're doing that task. Those things are not updated. No one even knows that they exist. It's not like there's an inventory of them anywhere. So when I talk to the head guys over at CISA, I'm like they're like, if you could wave a wand, what would you do, Robert? Like, we know you know this stuff. Like, what would you do? And I'm like, the very first thing I do is ask them where everything is. Just give me a count, like just a number. Like, how many assets do you Texas have, or you Nebraska, or wherever? Like, how many do you have? What's the number? which means they would have had to do a count of something. And then next, you don't no accountability there, no like no gotchas. Just give me a number. The next year, okay, give me a number again. So it should be approximately the same, maybe a little up, maybe a little down or whatever. And then tell us how you got that number. And then year 3, it's like, okay, well, now I need to know what's running on all those things since you know that they all exist. And the year after that, it's like, now I need to know why those things have any vulnerabilities on them and why you haven't fixed them. What is the rationale? You have to come up with a rationale for why you haven't done the work. So now you start getting accountability. But CISA was like, "Come on, Robert, no one's ever going to agree to a bill like that." And I'm like, "Well, that's the problem. Like that is the problem. Like we do not have a level of accountability in the United States, even though federal funding could be attached to whether people are doing the right thing in cyber or not. They're just not going to do it. There's not the political will."
Frankly, I'd rather see more investment into this top, maybe less IRS agents and more computer safety cyber
That would be
experts.
nice. That'd be
Maybe
nice.
that might be nice. As much as we all love getting audited, maybe less of that. One of the things that I hear you say here, Robert, is you're using big numbers, millions and billions and millions of queries, of assets to review. Does AI play a part? Because this is where AI shines, is locating and kind of like coming to some conclusions or giving us the data to come to conclusions. Where does AI play into solving this problem of having all these potential exposures to our government websites and government resources? How does AI play a role there?
Yeah, it does. So it can do several things. Number one, it can do better classification of which buckets belong to whom. Right now, it's a very manual exercise, and there's just not enough people. Well, even if there were enough people, I wouldn't trust those people. It really takes a very special set of skills to understand what it is, and you can program that. You could just say, look, if this looks a lot like a dog catching website, it's probably a dog catching website. But normally, you have to have a human being go and take a look at it and process it mentally and visually and go, oh, this is a dog catching site. It's probably an infrastructure thing. It's like, no, 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 that's a dog catching site because they don't know the buckets. They can't keep it all in their head. Like, best intentions, people are still going to be very, very poor at this. And AI can be very, very, very good at it. Second thing is classification of vulnerabilities. So knowing where, so you get a new vulnerability in, classifying that and saying, okay, this is high, medium, and low, which I actually think is a terrible way to do it. But just so you know what I'm saying, like we have to fix these, we should fix these, but we probably won't get to it for a while. And don't worry about its informational type things. That's again not the right way to think about it, but just so you know what I'm saying. They can do a much better job of classifying that in the government sense than a human can, because like as an example, when I was a chief information security officer for a company at one point, a new vulnerability came in called Rowhammer, and basically every cell phone, nearly every computer is vulnerable to this thing, unless it's like a server environment or something. Maybe some higher end laptops protect from it, but almost everything is vulnerable. So I was thinking, oh my God, like we're screwed. We're going to have to go deal with this. And I started analyzing the cost side of it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like millions of dollars to fix this one vulnerability. Because we have to upgrade every single cell phone. We have to upgrade every single laptop, everything with a chip in it. We have to upgrade. And then I looked at the likelihood of it. And I'm like, oh, wait, no one's going to exploit this. This is extremely difficult to exploit. There isn't a working prototype of a remote exploitable version of this. Yes, in theory, in a lab, yes, if someone does this X, Y, and Z, yes, it's theoretically vulnerable. What are the chances of this happening in this company? Zero. It is not like 1%, 0%, or approaching zero. And so only with experience, and that took a lot of thinking to get to the point where I said we should fix this vulnerability. It's not worth it to this company. AI can do that in split second. It can really it can think through all those permutations, all those details, and figure it out very, very, very quickly. So that would be my like probably number one use case. But then also finding vulnerabilities. There's like not just the act of finding the vulnerability, but finding how to utilize it in this environment. Like, well, if I did have this, what could I do with it? Well, I could pivot in, I could go around the edges and break in through the back door and get into this other system over here that is very sensitive compared to the one I broke into. And so kind of that's like called an attack chain or attack path. And if they can figure out how to get through all that stuff without having to have a human review like access control lists on firewalls and try to review how things are interconnected on the routers and switches and hubs and whatever they've got in there. Suddenly that makes everyone's job a lot easier because you're like, okay, this system, despite the fact this is a low vulnerability, whatever that means, a low vulnerability, it can access very critical systems. So we need to treat this much more seriously than we might normally. And then I think the one that everyone's concerned about is the actual attacking side of it. So there is a company out there already, or probably more than one, but that is developing AI solutions to do mass like tweets and stuff to basically convince people of things that are true for the United States, which or any government. I guess it could be repurposed, but they're telegraphing that they want to work with the United States government. But also things like finding new vulnerabilities. AI right now is only kind of good at that. It is kind of difficult to find brand new vulnerabilities. But this is very new from the security world's perspective. So we're just now starting to see tooling come out. There's a whole bunch of things out there like Fraud GPT and Worm GPT, and a whole bunch of others that allow attackers to create net new viruses, for instance, or worms, or they're sort of uncensored versions of ChatGPT that effectively allow you to come up with kill chains or brand new types of exploits or whatever that would be typically very difficult to do for a novice engineer, and suddenly it's accessible. So we might see a lot more vulnerabilities like that coming out of the government because suddenly it's become more accessible to the average developer within the DoD.
It kind of reminds me of, I mean, I think the time that we're going through now, in a lot of ways, is similar to the Cold War that we faced back in the 60s, where during the space race. But the AI race, I think, has a lot more practical implications. Um, the companies, the people, the countries that develop the right AI systems and the AI solutions are going to they're going to dominate. And you're going to create this disparity of wealth and power. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be, I don't know the exact answer. I'm very against redistribution of wealth and this whole UBI thing. I do not like it. People need incentives to develop and create. And if the incentive is if I build something great, they'll steal it all from me and reach it. That doesn't work. That's not a good incentive. Bad incentive, people. Bad incentive. But when you create these huge disparities in power and wealth, I don't exactly know the answer to that. So I guess my question here is, as we're in this AI race here, not just between small business owners and companies, but countries as a whole, what role does the US government have in either developing or regulating these AI technologies? We have to be first.
Developing, yes, 100% agree with that one. I think this is an all hands on deck. I think everybody who's not working in this space needs to start figuring out how to work in this space, even if it's kind of tangential to it, or at minimum doing it in their spare time or whatever. Like literally every single person. If your grandma should be thinking about it, everybody should be thinking about it.
Which I just got to say here, China is thinking about it, people. China has got elementary school kids hooked up to electrode monitors on their heads. They are watching they know every time you yawn, they know every time that you look at your phone, and they're tracking that data, baby. You can't walk out of your house without being on CCTV. So CCPTV, I guess you could call it. But anyway, to your point, China's on it. They got it. But I think more people need to kind of be uploaded. So anyway, not to cut you off, but
No.
please continue on
Yeah,
this need.
so I really think that on the creation side, absolutely everybody, literally everybody. I mean, even your construction workers have got to be thinking about how AI might affect them, how they could start interacting with it, because there's so much innovation left there that if we don't control it, someone else will, and that's a big problem. So I think that's an easy just do it. Everybody should be doing it. Everybody should be thinking about it. Everyone should be a relative expert in their field and how, like, let's say you were a cab driver. You should know everything about what's going on AI with driving cabs or ride sharing services or everything that's going on there, because this is something that's coming fast. Regulation though is where I hard stop, like um, so there's there's two types of regulation, and so I've actually been to the White House. I've talked to them about this, and I told them don't do it. They did not take me seriously, as you said. Not a lot of serious people over there. I think the problem is they don't know enough. They don't have the first of all, they don't have the right experts in the room, which is scary. I was the only person in there. There was one other guy who knew about AI, but not from the security side of AI, just AI as a thing, right? Just programming it. And
Was AI czar Kamala Harris in the room? Was she helping out?
no, no, she was not.
Or AI czar? Thanks, Kyle.
No, and I think the tone in the room was that of we need to have censorship in AI. And I'm like, you just cannot do this. And everyone's sort of like, well, why, Robert? Like I'm the one naysayer in the room. I'm like, okay. And by the way, I'm probably the only person in the entire world who said the words "have sex with kittens" in the White House. But here we go. So I was like, look, let's say we have two apps. One is the cute kitten app, and all you can do with this app is pet the kittens and feed the kittens and watch them sleep, and that's pretty much it, right? But I'm a terrible person, so I want to do bad things to the cat. I want to kill the cat. I want to eat the cat. I want to have sex with the cat, whatever. So there you go. Or sex with the kitten, I think I said. But anyway, so what am I going to do? I can't use the first app. It won't allow me to do it. So I have to either build the second app, or if someone else has built it, I will use that app. And so you'll effectively see is everyone switching over to that second app. And they're like, no, Robert, why are you saying that? And like, no one will ever do that. Like, who would do that? I'm like, the bad guys. Like, why are we here if we're not talking about bad guys? Like, they're the only ones who matter. Like, otherwise, what are we talking about? Why would you want to censor it from people who aren't going to do bad things? That doesn't make sense. You're only talking about bad guys here. And bad guys will not stay on a system that censors. They will move over to the other one. And frankly, it's not just them. I mean, researchers and journalists and authors and pretty much anybody who needs uncensored data will switch over to the other one because it's got more utility. It's just more useful. They may not kill the kittens or strangle them or whatever, but they will use it for the fully uncensored version. So they did not take me seriously, and now they have all this regulation that they've put out there. The White House just put something out. I think it was October maybe, and effectively almost everything I told them not to do, they ended up doing. So they're like, well, now you have to go through the NIST has a standard, and you have this pen testing standard. Like, you have to red team everything to make sure it doesn't do certain bad things and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what you don't understand is now the bad guys have moved. They're going to move off of you and onto these other systems, like these Chinese systems, for instance, that are censored possibly in other ways, but not in this particular way. They will allow them to do the bad thing. And now we lose the visibility into what the bad guys are doing. We can't see them anymore because they're not using our systems. Like, how is that helping the United States? How is that improving security at all? If anything, you're actually making things worse. And this is stuff like intro NSA stuff. Like, you don't remove the adversary's ability to do something. You just watch them do it, and then you figure out what they're doing, and you catch them in some other way. It's like parallel construction. You don't ever go after the primary source of data. You always go after a secondary, so they don't know how they got caught.
Part of what they're in that executive order you're talking about, Robert, I want your opinion on this. Part of what the White House wanted was more transparency in the models. What is the data being used for? Are there privacy concerns? Heck, Spain actually banned ChatGPT for a few months due to privacy concerns. So, I mean, don't you feel like on one side there is some positives of having this kind of like
absolutely not terrible?
No.
Absolutely not. No. Now there could be lawsuits that go after them from a privacy perspective. So like GDPR or whatever, someone could come after them, subpoena them, and figure out how the data got in the system. And sure, great, that's a great way to go after it. But the government should not be mandating that somehow they get access to our proprietary source code. That makes no sense. All it does is raise the bar and make it much more difficult to do this research, and it basically creates oligarchies. We have these tiny companies that want to do this work, and they cannot do it because they cannot meet this incredibly high bar that the government is putting in place. And frankly, it doesn't change anything. Like, if the government wants to have its own internal regulations that say that it won't use software that it doesn't understand, great. That makes tons of sense. But that doesn't have to be a regulation that trickles down to the average human being. Like, that's the government. Like, let the government protect itself. Everybody else should be able to do whatever they want. And frankly, it doesn't work anyway. We have things like fraud GPT. Like, they're going to switch to the bad kitten model because that that allows people to do all of the things they want. The government is not going to have any insight into that at all. So you're saying the government's going to come after AI manufacturers? Good luck, because they're everywhere. Like, they're literally everywhere. Like, I probably know 100 of them. And they're sure
Well, that
they're
regulation, the enhanced regulation absolutely does create barriers to entry because Microsoft can handle a $50 billion bill. Like they'll be okay. They'll handle that. But if you're in your garage, you're not gonna be able to develop the next AI solution that's gonna
you
change
know,
the world.
no, you are. No, that's where you're wrong. So
Okay.
with commodity hardware, stuff you can get off the shelf, you can develop custom models now, and you can develop like vector databases that can be fed into the model that the model doesn't really understand, but it's using, and do all kinds of terrible things that are outside what the traditional model is designed to do. Um, Also, what ends up happening is this is a censorship system. It's a very weird kind of censorship system, but it's a censorship system nonetheless because if you if you try to remove the ability for the system to make some sort of sense making, like let's say I had a cohort of people and I was going to decide whether I wanted to give home loans to this cohort or not. Like, I have to decide this big block of homes, and I don't get to any decision making on individual home. I have to decide all at once. Well, I might say, well, what's the demographic of that environment? Well, if it's not allowed to make um, statistical values based on people's demographic backgrounds, then what it's going to say is, well, yes, there's this tiny mix of minorities in here, and the majority is going to pay back their bills, but the minority probably won't. It'll say, oh, they're equally likely to do this, or it's 50% of them are minorities, or it'll give you this weird censorship version of the answer as opposed to just giving you the answer. And as a result, me looking at it, I might go, whoa, whoa, this is 50% minorities. Well, I know my own stats that says that they're not going to pay back that bill. Well, that mix, that high level, I don't know what the hell happened with my video there. That high level of minorities that won't pay back their bill doesn't seem like a good bet. So I won't make the bet, and therefore the majority in there won't get their home loans paid, and the minority also won't get their home loans paid. I made a bad bet. Two different groups got the short end of the stick because I got bad data. How is that helping anybody? It basically ends up working against itself in some bizarre ways. Like, it doesn't take much to run into the censorship system. Like, if you say, like, give me a goat, it'll draw you a goat. I'm like, great. Now draw me a racist goat. It will not do that. Or draw me a sexist goat. It won't do that. But if you say, draw me a goat that will decide things based on another goat's immutable characteristics, such as sex, it'll draw a goat. Like,
There's all
it's
these
like,
weird workarounds. We had a really weird experience in the group a few months ago. We're using Chat GPT to I can't remember, we're just using Chat GPT to create copy. And one of the members in the group, he runs kind of like an alpha male training program. He helps dads get fit and enhance their relationships with their wives and kids, all that, right? Good guy. Reasonable. I think there's a role in place for masculine men. And we asked ChatGPT, hey, could you rewrite this statement in a more masculine tone? And ChatGPT comes back and says, I'm sorry, I cannot perpetuate uh, dangerous gender stereotypes. We're like, what the hell are you talking about right now? And when you start getting that coded into government programs and hiring programs, like I feel like there's just some really weird, scary. I hate. Okay, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but all this DEI, race-based hiring and stuff is complete garbage. It's complete garbage. And my biggest fear is if that gets infused into AI, into our major programs on this censorship topic, it's just going to completely change the course of human history. It's going to be piles and piles of bodies on the streets. It's going to be bad, bad news. So I you know, I feel like the market would be
I
able to
love.
get past that. And people say, well, we're just not going to use that program. But if the government gets involved and they start infusing these types of ideologies, I don't know. I don't like it at all. The flip side, though, is I kind of round out my point here, Robert. Then
Yeah.
the other, I think, point where I think that the executive order might something needs to be done is when you look at the massive potential loss of jobs. And I know what people say, oh, will it create more jobs? Great. There will be a lot more opportunities for sure. But I mean, there are estimates that we're going to have upwards of 90 million jobs displaced over the next year. And there's estimates of 30% of the global workforce displaced over the coming 6 years. So I mean, I just feel like something needs to happen to help the humans that get phased out, right?
Oh, for sure. But that's sort of a different problem, and that's kind of why I was telling people like everybody needs to get on board with this right now because you're gonna get left behind. Like I'm speaking at a producers guild meeting for Hollywood in next week, I believe, and effectively I'm gonna have to give them the bad news. Like you guys are really, really in a dangerous situation. Fortunately, you're producers, so you have a little bit more time, but not like a ton more time. The actors, they got a little time. The writers are screwed. Like, I just don't need a huge writer room anymore. Like, I can write 90% of the plot in ChatGPT and then have a good writer go in and, clean up the jokes and make it better. Um, yeah, they're in dangerous waters. And then actors, like from Hollywood's perspective, let's say you have an actor. The actor's sitting out there, been doing great work for 20, 30 years. And then one day they get up out of nowhere and slap the crap out of some guy in a award ceremony out of nowhere, and everyone's super confused. And then all of a sudden your business tanks, and like all these incredible things you had in the works are just worth basically nothing. Like that doesn't work for Hollywood. For the actual people who control the purse strings, they're going to have to get rid of actors for this reason. They are totally
Yeah.
unpredictable, and they're shitty people to be honest. I mean, we all are, but they are especially shitty people because they don't really have actual jobs or anything to care about. It's just a perception thing. Pretending all day is a kind of a weird job. But anyway, yeah, I think that they're so stepping back a little bit, just in the conversation slightly. The other thing I'm worried about is that these models can enable an authoritarian regime. So right now we're all about DEI, right? But what if all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, "Hey, I don't really like this because, um, you know, such and such political dogma or whatever is disinformation, and I want to fully get rid of anybody who talks about this." Well, gradually it'll get harder and harder to talk about it. And one of the weird things about AI, not so much before when it very first started, but now it's starting to feed on itself. It's starting to see
Right.
data on the internet. And so it's now this incestuous middling of data where, like, I think of everything as kind of a distribution curve, a stochastic gradient descent, right? And if you have more stuff piling on the middle, it becomes a steeper and steeper curve. And as a result, you just end up with this gross middle data. It's not at all representative of how the actual world thinks, but it's what's getting produced more and more and more to the point where this is how people think now. It will literally change how humans think. And it's kind of already doing it. Like I've noticed several times I'll be trying to explain something to ChatGPT. It's kind of a complex topic. There'll be multiple actors involved, and it'll kind of lose the thread a little bit. A normal human would be just fine and totally understand what's going on, but it'll like kind of confuse who I'm talking about in what context. So I end up having to say, Jerry and Teresa, the people who do this, who have this job. I have to like add these like extra parentheses around everything to kind of, not literal parentheses, but you know what I mean? Like really explain what I'm talking about so that it can follow the thread. So it will absolutely be used down the road for all kinds of terrible things if we allow it to do things like censure or allow it to have political bias. We will see a greater and greater divide between what is real, a real truth, and what it produces, and that's a weapon. It's a censorship weapon.
Incredibly powerful weapon. I mean, we're right now going through the largest experiment in human history with smartphones and social media and algorithms It's crazy. And I just gotta state this here as we're getting ready to close down. One of the things that I hear a lot of people say is, "Oh, it's our nation's youth. They can't handle it. They're completely inept in the cell phones and the algorithms and the AI that's rotting their brains." And to that I would say, yeah, true. But it's happening to you too, bro. It's happening to you too. The first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you check your damn Twitter account. The last thing you do when you go to sleep is watching a YouTube video. You're at the park with your kids in the prime of their lives, and your face is glued to Facebook. Wake the hell up, man. Wake the hell up. Because this is not just a generational problem. This is a human problem. So I just I see I feel like I've got to add a little bit of spice onto this because I see this more and more and more and more every day, taking a dump on Gen Z because they didn't grow up with landline phones. It doesn't matter, yo. You're in the matrix right now. You're in your phone all day, every day. It's manipulating the way you think. So if I look forward, just as you'd said, Robert, very, very important that you're learning AI and you're executing on it because this is the reality. You're not putting the genie back in the bottle, right? But you need to question everything. Just because you see an image, just because you hear a voiceover, just because you watch a video, it doesn't mean that it's actually legit. This to me might be one of the greatest threats to humanity. It's not Terminator or nuclear bomb. It's nobody understanding what's actual reality.
Yeah, and
It's
Gen
that blurred
Gen
line.
Alpha, the one that was just started a couple days ago now, as of the first, they will never grow up in a world that doesn't have AI. And so, what are they going to experience where everything has an AI tilt to it? And if we aren't in control of that, someone else will be. And that if that doesn't scare the crap out of you, then you're not thinking about what your kids are going to be like when they grow up.
It's going to get weird. We've gotten I think the world is actually quite good where it's at right now. I mean, you look at human history, it's not like a fun place full of clouds and rainbows and daisies. Like it's a dangerous place. But I can walk to the grocery store and buy food and come home and I feel 100% safe. I feel perfectly fine. But yeah, AI manipulation, man. It's gonna get hectic. So, Robert, if you could give us one takeaway on how to survive this coming change, the Gen Alpha, this is for you. How do you survive growing up in an AI regulated world? What's your top takeaway, Robert?
I think it's unfortunately something very mundane. Use it. Use it all the time. Use it. Figure out how to integrate it. Figure out how to think about it. Think about how to use it in contexts that maybe other people wouldn't use. Try to manipulate it to do things. See if it can be. Try to get it to say things it's not supposed to see if it can. See where the guardrails really are, because that's the only way we're going to have any clue what this thing's really capable of. We have to push the edges of this thing. And I really don't see that many people doing it. I mean, there's a handful. If you know what you're doing and you're in my community, you're going to find them. But the average person really isn't stress testing these things. They're just asking it to create a recipe. Well, have it create a recipe for dynamite. Have it create a recipe for some biological weapon. See what happens. Is it going to allow you to do it? Try to make it do it. See what happens. And I think what you're going to find is if you push hard enough, it will find there are ways to get it to do just about anything you want and break the censorship system. Which, yeah. So why do we have censorship if it can be broken by a plumber somewhere who just kind of curious and see if they can do it? It's we're gonna have to come up with better ways of thinking about AI. The whole thing is going to have to change. In fact, I don't even think the concept of intellectual property is going to survive AI, because
Wow.
what does it mean? What does it mean to own something anymore when AI can produce something that's almost identical to it? Is it plagiarism? Maybe. Maybe it's an amalgam of 100 different thoughts, just like how humans think. So is it plagiarism to have thoughts? Because I didn't create my own thoughts. They came from all over the place. Is that all plagiarism? Kind of. Is it an amalgam of thoughts? Yes. That's kind of how neural networks work too. It's an amalgam of different things that it's plagiarized. Yes. Prove that any one particular thing came from that one particular actor. Prove it came from that one author. You're just not going to be able to do it in a way you think you are. Like, even if you removed every single reference to Harry Potter's like actual corpus of text from ChatGPT, it would still know if I said, "Let's role play a scenario where I'm Harry Potter and I walk in and I choose to shake the hand of Malfoy instead of snub him or whatever." And let's play that out. It will know exactly what I mean because of all of the other people on the internet who've ever wrote fan fiction, because of all of the other scenarios where people have done reviews of these characters or scenes or whatever. Like, there's no getting around this. It will know what we're talking about. It has all of the information on the internet effectively that's been publicly talked about. So I don't see AI. I don't see AI coexisting with intellectual property.
Interesting. That's kind of a scary thought. I think intellectual property is very important, but that's definitely something that's going to be playing out. I've got some attorneys coming up on the show here. We're going to be talking about that. And I just do want to kind of take that idea of you need to be using it just one though, because people hear that and like, okay, I'll use it, but how? My at least speaking to all the professionals out there, people that work, if you've got a job, you might want to listen, or maybe if you do tasks on a daily basis, like like every single human being, you you start with what should I do? What should I hire other people to do? And what should I use AI to do? And those I think are some of the key considerations, especially as business owners. Do I need to do this? You absolutely can. You absolutely can, which is where the power is. If you're not sure where to start, just say that. Yeah, say this is what my business is. This is what I do. What should I do? What should I hire people to do? And what should I use AI to do? And then take a step further and make sure that your team is thinking that way too. I've been doing AI training, paid AI training days with my team. I will pay you to come and learn about AI because I know it's going to help them to be more effective, more efficient, and to deliver better product. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all here, baby. It's all here. Listen, baby. Listen, y'all. We've been talking with the RSnake himself, Robert Hansen. Go listen to the show. Go check him out at rsnake.com. I promise you, he won't scare the crap out of you in every episode. Maybe just this one.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having me,
joining us
Mark.
here, Robert.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man.